Good morning,
Now
Ron.
we're both on. Hello, Aristo.
How are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and the indicators of the recording look like they're both working, both sides.
Okay, so we're on.
Looks like it.
I'm in a paradoxical state right now a little bit because I listened to your video, and then a friend of mine sent me an article, a recent article by Paul Levy, who basically came up with the idea of the Wendigo. So he talks about, in this article, the relationship of good and evil, that evil actually comes from God and is part of creation, according to Jewish mysticism, for example. So he uses that. But I just got the article as soon as right when you called, so I haven't had time to read it.
Well, I like Paul Levy. I've read a lot of his articles. He's a very deep thinker and does a lot of writing about healing the shadow and dealing with both the individual and collective shadow that we have to deal with as humans.
So I'll post this on your Facebook page. I'm just trying to say that, now I got a bunch of people who sat in the computers next to me. So I hope the sound is good and we're not getting too much interference. But I'm in a kind of paradoxical state where the esoteric stuff, the stuff about the shadow and all of that, are mixed in with all the stuff you discussed in your latest video. But at the same time, I believe we should approach the pragmatic situations in that framework, that we shouldn't divorce ourselves from the inner essence of the basics of the shadow, good and evil, all of these things, whether one believes in it or not. And, the practical stuff, the stuff we engage in, the plans that we come out. So I believe that we should reference one whenever we deal with the other and vice versa. And that's what made an impression on me in your own video presentation, where there was a discussion about it wasn't just economics or enforcement or how to do the ABCs of fixing things, what's right, what's wrong, etc. There was a talk about past lives. There was a talk about connection. There was a talk about basics. And I understand that so-called spirituality is not as simplistic as most people like to make it. And it's a little dangerous to oversimplify because, there can be a lot of misunderstanding, misconception, disinformation coming in. But at the same time, the heart simplifies things on its own in a natural way. The heart simplicity is the simplicity that I'm aligned with, that kind of simplicity. But mental simplicity is something I believe one should approach with caution. Now, another thing is synchronistically, whenever there's noise in the environment, I do many recordings to friends of mine, vocal recordings with a recorder, and we communicate that way. And I discuss issues and stuff. So whenever things are sensitive, usually I notice people just rush up here in this usually quiet place. And there's a lot of background noise. People are upset, start arguing, and there's a hubbub. And I take that as a synchronistic indication that, we're treading in very sensitive territory right now. Well,
it's interesting, too, that my video for today about meeting Mr. Sino, Facebook would not allow it to go up with I don't know if it was YouTube or Facebook, but they weren't synchronizing. Normally, the thumbnail from the video that I select, that's the one that goes up as the image, and you can click on the image and get the video. Well, this time it would only allow the red box with like a frown on it, like a symbol inside of the red box. Yeah. It would only upload that. No matter what I did, it would not upload the thumbnail.
The automatic judgment that you're not supposed to put it on. And a lot of times it's somebody, but many times the reaction, the chaotic reaction, is from the environment itself, especially when we're dealing with computers. Computers are based on quantum states, and they're very sensitive, and so one little trigger of chaos can create a probability where a whole cascade of disruption occurs. There's a lot of automation in these things as well. The thing is that the environment responds, even if it's not an overt conspiracy, even if it's not a conscious conspiracy, there is a subconscious collective conspiracy within the shadow elements, the elements of denial, the whole mix. So it's very interesting and very important, I believe, for everybody to notice where shit starts going chaotic, when things don't move smoothly, and what we're addressing at the time that things start going haywire around us. There's an astrological thing called Mercury retrograde that's supposed to hit the next month. And most people say, oh, disruption in thought and communication. But what it really means is that your own reality processing is internalizing in order for you to remove the glitches. We usually move on automatic pilot, and we don't even realize we're doing so. We expect reality to take care of itself, and we like to keep things normalized and habituated because we don't have to deal with anything. So Mercury retrograde and all the retrograde planets is really an inversion of the energy that forces us to go back and do a troubleshooting within ourselves of how we process reality. Or if we don't do this, that's when the glitches occur, because it's not going to be business as usual. And I believe this is what's happening in our collective. You know, there's just so much trauma and pain. Things are not going to work, that everything's going to start stumbling and not working, and you're even going to have cancerous forces coming out and trying to dominate until we begin to look at our own glitches and what's not working on all levels, the pragmatic level, the internal level, and the level that connects the two, which is very, very important. It's the level that connects the two, in my opinion, where we see these synchronistic, chaotic things come up, like people not letting us say what we want to say, or the computers breaking down, or, you know, us getting sick. All of a sudden you want to come up and, you know, present yourself, and all of a sudden you get a cold or something, or an accident. All of these things are messages. I wouldn't say they're lessons, but everything is an indicator. I believe in the organic understanding of reality. I've said this before. Just like we have our bodies and nature, I don't believe in a computer simulation analogy. I don't believe in technological analogies and artificial ones, or psychological analogies like parent-child and all of this. I believe, like, let's look at nature. This is the most fundamental. Our bodies are the most fundamental level of reality with which we have access and relation. Bodies of other people. It's what we know to be true. So it's actually very debilitating when somebody tells you your physical plane is an illusion, because this is your fundamental level of connection. And so if you have the presence that this, whether it's functioning properly, maybe it's not true, because it's not functioning based on truth. Maybe it's afflicted, but it's still real. So
yeah, well, to me, that's the most pernicious and devastating false teaching that there ever is, that our reality is just an illusion, that our physical reality, that negates the whole purpose of creation, as I see it.
Exactly. But since we're on the same page as this, and I believe most of your listeners are on the same page, I mean, this has been said passionately, and one of the reasons we say it passionately is so those who really don't want to be on that level of understanding, let them go. They're going to feel tremendously uncomfortable when somebody is passionate about what they believe that doesn't resonate with them. So the cognitive dissonance in that case is going to say, well, you're either going to reevaluate the situation, or you're going to leave and go where you're more comfortable or where you feel things express you. This has to happen. I don't think it's a bad thing when people say, I can't take what you say anymore, it bothers me, it's, you know, I have to work that out some other way. But the people, there are so many people who don't have a Venua connection that believe in this. So many people that are disheartened by spirituality because it poses all they know is true as an illusion. And these people are the ones that, you know, you and I and Peter and other people feel can make a difference more directly than the ones who just believe in escapism. or who define being as a passive state of doing nothing. Whereas being and doing are one and the same. This is called karma yoga.
Inner and outer are one and the same.
Exactly.
When it comes right down to it, there is no separation. Period.
There is no separation, and we ask ourselves the question, not just for discussion's sake, but to answer it, what does that mean in my life? What does that mean in my experience? How do I apply this? It doesn't necessarily mean joining an organization, doing this or that, in terms of other people clapping their hands and validating you. It means, how do I work this in my own way? And then that resonance is going to connect me to a greater purpose. It has to, because everybody is resonating. It's a human, we've noticed with the internet and other things, that passion is a positive human attribute. No matter what the psychos try to tell us that we're cockroaches, they never reference passion. Passion is something they're trying to douse and destroy. The flames of passion, however, are the key to resolution, in my honest opinion. This is the reason why I speak about no guarantees. I'm not doing it as a pessimist or as a realist. I'm saying that if you can sustain your passion while not being attached to the sense of having a guarantee, your passion is what creates the reality. Your passion is what establishes the guarantee. It's like the economic sense that we are the value. The value is like a fuel that just sits there unless we ignite it with our passion, and then it becomes kinetic energy. It can drive the engines of progress, the engines of creation, of anything that we want to manifest. So there have been misunderstandings, in my view, about just giving money to people and saying, here, use my flame. Money is like energy, so it makes us do things in interchange. But the investment is basically the spark teaching us or inspiring us or giving us the space, the freedom, and the opportunity to create a spark that can ignite the fuel of our own potential. Potential and effect are two different things. They're connected, but there needs to be a certain personal effort in order to create potential energy, which something just sits here, and it has the potential to move, to drop. But if I make the movement of releasing it, gravity is going to turn it into a motion. And that is what we're learning. That is where the confusion comes in, because there's all kinds of chaos that seems to not want it to happen. And you mentioned about roles. Now, in my opinion, it's not like the psychopaths have stopped playing the roles and they're now standing back and watching. They're ongoingly. I mean, I think I've said before, they're talking about building a maximum security prison here that's like the Bastille in France or the Guantanamo or something. I don't know why, but I think it's because they, but it's another one of those threats. And I've noticed that many kinds of threats, like concentration camps, economic collapse, and I've said this before, it's like these are the dampeners on our passion. And it's like, yeah, that just tells us that there are no guarantees, that we live at the tip of a point where there's a confluence of contradictory and paradoxical forces. Forces that seem to be good, forces that seem to be evil, and they're meeting at a place that doesn't seem to be moving. We don't seem to be going to timeline 1, we don't seem to be really going to timeline 2. We just seem to be stimulated to continuously wake up to that situation. It's a constant accumulation of potential energy. And I wanted to talk about something today. Unless you have an addition to make or questions to ask about your own video, but there's an example here that relates to your previous videos. A friend of mine, I like to associate with creative people. People who build things, people who design things, people who make things. And I find that very inspiring and exciting, even more than the spiritual type of person. So a friend of mine's building something, and like many people who have an esoteric bent, when you build something, you associate it with an internal development. I'm putting something together. Something is coming together within me. So he reaches a point, and you start noticing a correlation between all of the challenges you're encountering in this building, whether it's a project that's material or an ideal or something, and what's going on inside of you. So he comes to the point where he's building this material thing, and he finds a part that's very expensive. But this part happens to represent the equivalent of the human spine, the pillar that holds the whole thing together. So all of a sudden, before everything was easy, now it's all of a sudden, all of these challenges come up in his life. What's going on here? And he says to himself, this is too expensive. I can't pay all this money for this thing. I need to look for some kind of deal. And then a friend comes up, and the friend says, well, I can offer it for half price because I get it in bulk and all of this stuff. However, it turns out that there's a conflict between the friend's girlfriend and this guy, some kind of weird love triangle and stuff. And so the friend, this guy's getting a bad feeling about the quality of the material he's going to get. But it's cheap. What's he going to do? He doesn't have any opportunity. Here he's given an opportunity, but there are some strange ulterior motives going on. So I tell the guy, look, man, any karma that comes from this guy, just be fully aware that you're involved in this, and that if it happens, he's partaking in it. He's not going to shove all of his karma on you through this material object, so it breaks or whatever happens. And the next day he calls me and he tells me, oh, he reneged on the deal. He's not doing it anymore. He says he can't do it. All of a sudden, which, synchronistically is like, well, he can't deal with that commitment that, look, I'm not going to pay for this. Just because I'm paying half price, I'm not going to pay the other half in terms of some kind of, resentment, carrying the guy's resentment. So then he's busting his head, but he figures out a solution. All of this time that he was looking for the deal, a part of his mind was working on a different solution. So he figures he can get the part for cheap, cut it in little pieces, repaste it together, and make it even stronger than it was before, and get it from somewhere where there is no ulterior motive. However, this is not going to look pretty. It's going to be strong, it's going to be functional, it's not going to look pretty. So there we have another compromise. And even as this was working out, all of a sudden he finds the part from a place that's fully beautiful, half price or whatever, and the opportunity comes to him and he gets that. Now, what is the moral of this story is that grace does not come to us from the get-go. It only comes to us when we have cultivated a certain space of working with the situation ourselves. Even if we go through failure 1, failure 2, failure 3, or progression. In the first situation, the guy was working with the deeper issues and the guy had back problems too, connected with relationships. Whenever the relationship went sour, the guy's back went out. He couldn't carry the weight. And all of these things basically were working through until he figured, well, I can reconstruct this part, but it's not going to look pretty because it's not natural. Put epoxy on it and all kinds of stuff. But as soon as he got his own creativity to work on the issue, that he wasn't dependent on other people, even if the solution was compromised, he opened the door for grace to actually come through. He resolved the shadow issues by dealing with the resistances of the other side, so to speak, and the processing of the problem that led to these stages that if grace hadn't come through, he would have compromised, for example, but it didn't feel right, so he held back, and all of a sudden, grace came through. I'm expressing this because I've seen this pattern time and time again. But this guy's story, which came recently, was basically to the point. It said, wow, you just described something that I wanted to say in my next video with Ron, but I couldn't find the words for it. So when we think all is lost or all is confused, there is a process, there is a method to the madness. And even if I'm talking theory right now, or it seems like I'm talking theory, every one of us can look at our lives as a field, as an arena of these things working themselves out. So that's what I wanted to express, and I feel that it also applies with, your situation, because it's interesting how you were with Rusa before, and you saw that Tim Turner was a good person in all of this, but also the guy was human, and you see that Karen Hudes is a good person and doesn't have ulterior motives, but that doesn't mean she knows everything. And the same thing with Mr. Sino. Although I've researched this guy, like I had said before, in details, and he comes from a very traditional Indonesian spiritual tradition. It's shamanic. They used to have hereditary shamans who would rule the place. These people were like king mystics, almost like Israel, where you had the priest and the king, but there they were one and the same person. So there is the belief that, yes, you can have an enlightened ruler, but at the same time, in our day, this doesn't apply so much because we are all challenged to be enlightened sovereigns. Not rulers, but sovereigns. There's a difference. And this is all in potential. So if the financial system can come and trigger that potential, can give us the incentive to ignite the passion that we have in our own ways, but it can't do that unless we ourselves are motivated to look at our spark generators. Each of us has a spark generator. We have that potential fuel, but we also have this flint and stone, and we can strike that spark, and sometimes it strikes, and we get disappointed when it doesn't turn into a flame. Well, it's not supposed to. Just like those first trials of that piece of, material that represented the spine, this was creating a spark, and we're trying to create a strong enough spark, a most consistent spark. When you're out in nature with a flint, they make it look so easy. Poof, poof, 2 sparks. No, it takes a lot, especially with the stick. It's a pain in the butt to try to light a fire with that thing. And we get frustrated. But if we know the perspective that we're exercising our spark generator, because we don't want to create an explosion. We're afraid of change, and for a good reason, because in the past, our sparks created explosions. Too much, too fast, too much oxygen, too little oxygen. Sometimes things fizzle out. We are learning how to light the flame of our passion that manifests the reality we desire. We don't know how.
I had one person, actually a fairly close friend, challenge me. Why don't you make it happen now? Why are you delaying it? Why the delay? And I understand his frustration because it's mine too. But one of the things that keeps coming up in discussions with other peace delegates is, and we see it in channeled messages from the ETs too, they don't want to create a bloodbath. They don't want it to turn into a conflagration. They want to try to make the transition as gentle as possible, although there's always going to be some sparks and flies with a change. But nevertheless, they don't want to destroy the world in the process.
And also, we want to make the change sustainable. You don't want it to spark up and then fizzle out because everybody's going to say, well, give me some more. Give me another spark. I can't do it. Mommy, Daddy, what's the next step? And people say that, and it's true that you don't want to create dependence. You want to create people who are self-sufficient. That doesn't mean sticking them out in the boonies and making them fend for themselves. It means self-sufficient once they understand how one can create reality. And the best way to exercise is when you have weights on your feet and hands. When you weight it down and it feels like it's 10 million times harder, then you get the maximum benefit from a workout, so to speak, from a development process. When this happens, and this is a resistance, no, I want it to be easy. Well, we've atrophied. We've become, and so we've accumulated toxins. And these toxins are not going to be making things easier. It's not just a role that the Dark Ones, so-called, are playing, or what's in the dark, or whatever. It's an accumulation of incarnate resentment. When you have a society where you don't have a conspiracy, just nature taking its course, and if you've seen any nature documentary, it's not paradise. You have famines, you have diseases, you have things going on, predators, All kinds of stuff goes on. And in human beings, because human beings were becoming more and more aware in their evolution, they were also becoming resentful of this natural survival law of the jungle type of thing. And so they wanted to change it. And toxins accumulate. And then they set laws, and these laws were further restrictions, so more resentment. And parents take out the resentment on their children, so more resentment. Resentment is... I had a dream last night. Maybe it pertains to this issue, that at some point I was walking through a school, and before in the dream, people were chasing me and all of this, and I had found along the way a female dog with a bunch of puppies, and I took them home, and I started raising them, and kittens and all of this, and they were safe, but then I went outside, and all of the trees were full of these tiny, weird dewdrops under the leaves. And I looked closer, and the dewdrops were wasps. Giant wasps, little wasps, bees, and these symbolize what you may call negative thought forms, negative intention, toxic will, something that gets really pissed off at the slightest provocation and is out to sting you. And so these weren't active, but there was a little kid in there that was really mean. And, he was threatening to hit the branches with a stick and get all the wasps after all the other kids in the school.
Sounds like my grandson.
Yeah. I mean, and this kid was really nasty. And we'll show them, we'll pound the trees and get the wasps out, and everybody's going to get stung. And then there was this adult that was really somehow critical of me. But he was also, well, you have to let it happen. If it happens, we'll just batten down the hatches, and if it happens... And I just grabbed the kid and I said, if you do this, we're going to hunt you down, and we're going to throw you in the middle of the... But in the end, it didn't happen. I was still walking edgy through this forest with these broadleaf leaves, but there was no nest. There were just these wasps hanging in a dormant state. And this is how I feel the world is. But the thing is that we need to, as we move through making sure that we don't activate this craziness. The psychopaths are trying to get us to activate it. They can't do it on their own. They're trying to freak us out, so we push our passion to say the world isn't worth it, it's meaningless, or we're crazy, let's do it, forget it. Either a bloodbath or a capitulation, either way. And at the same time, and that was like those little kids freaked out and all of this. They think they're gonna be in charge when they do it. They don't they think they're immune to the stings, or they have a nice hiding place where, But the challenge is something that doesn't seem realistic in terms of how can you transform a wasp? But that is the challenge, is that we are in a forest that we are challenged to manifest and take these wasps. And like I said, these were dewdrops. And the dewdrops were coming from the trees themselves, and they were like honeydew. They were like nectar. And so the nectar, when it sits and putrefies in resentment, turns into this mutation that's like a wasp that can come out and fly and sting you. So it's how to revert this back into the nectar that belongs to the tree. And we are also the trees. The trees are the pillars between heaven and earth. All of this symbolism kind of comes together, and it was a very, very vivid dream. And it also poses the challenge. It's a fantastic challenge, and it's almost like, wow, this is a wondrous time to be in. It's a bitch of a time, but it's also, if you get to understand how you can work with it, that eventually you can become a human being who outwardly, through a creation of a system or whatever, and or inwardly, in a psychic way or whatever, can establish the means to transform toxicity into something healing. That's what a shaman does.
What homeopathy does.
Exactly. And this is why I believe the so-called DTs, whatever they are, in whatever form, shape, dimension, are not interfering. This has never happened before. This kind of transmutation, if it happens once in the universe, because then you have a source, and the source can be transmitted. All other forms of evolution are compensations. They have too many compromises, and so resentment builds. Even if you can transfer it somewhere else, or if you can delay it, it still builds. And we are the repository of the resentment of the universe. Maybe the ETs themselves are still moving along because they've been able to dump all their shadow onto us, with the promise that we are designed to deal with it. There are all these stories about some ETs wanting to hijack our DNA, to take over our bodies because we have something special. What is that? Many say it's an alchemical something, a certain DNA quality, or a quality of being, of manifest being, that can transmute anything in the universe.
It's passion, like you said before.
Exactly. It's a certain passion that ranges from the physical, sexual, to the cognitive, intellectual, to the spiritual, and the center of it is the heart itself. And that is my viewpoint of what is going on in a nutshell. I believe I have talked quite a bit. So
we're at 30 minutes.
Okay, intuitively it just came. So, unless you want to bring up something about the video, or
No, we're good. I'm going to be probably doing some follow-up videos to that one. Okay. Peter Van Runt raised some questions on today's video, and I'll be probably doing my next video on that subject.
I'm looking forward to it. This is going to be a very, very interesting dialogue, and a further step from everything that has gone on before with Rusa and all of that. And all of those lessons are a foundation of this development.
Yeah, well, it actually looks like this Swiss Indo thing is going to roll. I mean, I had my doubts a few days ago, and before that, but right now I'm quite encouraged that it's actually what they're saying is going to happen, and they've been saying is going to happen since last summer, is actually going to happen.
Well, I hope it not only rolls. I mean, many things can roll, but I hope it rolls well.
Yeah, I do too. There's many visionaries that are working very hard to create the best we can possibly create together. Thank you, Aristo.
Thank you, Ron, for everything that you're doing. Namaste until next time.